let me go to this and then I'll go to that. All right, so admiralty and maritime jurisdiction in the Constitution. What does that mean? Okay, where does admiralty and maritime come from? It comes from the civil law. It comes the definition of the word civil law is the Roman law. Okay? The definition of the word civil law and all that it entails means the exact same word, Roman law. They say ecclesiastical law comes from the Roman law. Equity law comes from the Roman law. We already talked about commerce. Well, that comes from the Roman law. I got an English law book that says if you want to understand the Roman law, you got to go study Babylon because that's where they got it from. And then I'm going to turn it around again. They said if you want to study Roman law, then you got to go to Babylon because that's where they got it from. What we now know to be Roman law, okay, well that, in order to know what that is, you got to keep going back. They said if you want to know what Roman law is, okay, well you got to go study Babylonian law. They say you want to study Babylonian law. I actually have law books that say this stuff. Okay, well you got to go to Egypt. Okay, well if you want to know to Egypt, you can go to the Bible, and they're going to tell you about these people called the Canaanites. And then you can follow the trajectory of the Canaanites to the Phoenicians to the merchants, all right? So, all of this stuff, if you want to understand Roman law, which is today called the civil law. So anytime you look up the word civil law, they're going to say anytime you hear the words municipal, corporation, business, commerce, all of this stuff, admiralty and maritime is under the Roman civil law. They said this word is interchangeable. Matter of fact, I'll pull up the definition. Let's see. Yeah, let's do this one. ABC. Site civil. All right. There we go. Perfect. What is civil law? They say civil law, Roman law, and Roman civil law are convertible phrases. They mean the exact same system of jurisprudence. What is jurisprudence? That's the consciousness of the law. It's the same thing. It means the exact same system of law. All right, the exact same thinking. They say this is the rule of action which every particular nation, commonwealth, or city has established peculiarly for itself, more properly called municipal law. So they say anytime you hear the word municipal, that it is of the civil law, which is called the Roman law. Right? So anytime you hear the word municipal law, they say this word municipal law is to distinguish it from the law of nature. Then they tell you this thing called municipal law, which is occupied with the exposition and enforcement of civil rights. Okay, well, what does civil mean? It means Roman. That's literally what the word means. Let's see here. They said the exposition and enforcement of civil rights. They said this system of jurisprudence held and administered in the Roman Empire. So they say anytime you hear the word relating to civil law, it means Roman law, Roman civil law. Anytime you hear municipal, it is related to Roman law. They say anytime you hear this, it is administered in the Roman Empire. Who is this? This is the Supreme Court of Louisiana. Why would Louisiana know this? Because they are founded, their law in Louisiana is the Roman law. They call it French law. They call it Napoleonic. Okay, well, you study France. They've been under Rome forever. Okay? So, they say, this is the system of jurisprudence held and administered in the Roman Empire, particularly as set forth in the compilation of Justinian and his successors. Okay, well, go look up who Justinian is. He was a Roman emperor. And they say you can find this Roman civil law in the Code of Justinian, the Digest, and the novels called the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is the name of the body of civil law. And they say that this is distinguished or the opposite of the common law of England. Okay. So what's the opposite of the common law of England? The Roman law and all that it entails, of which admiralty and maritime jurisdiction is under. Okay? And that's the Supreme Court of Louisiana. They say this Roman law is used in contradistinction to the laws of England and those of the respective states. Boom. That's the Supreme Court of Louisiana under the definition in a law dictionary of Roman law. All right? So, civil law, Roman law, same thing. Under Roman and civil law, you have ecclesiastical law. Under ecclesiastical law, they use no jury. They use priests who wear robes and conduct ceremonies. Does this make sense? So how do you know you're in an admiralty court? There's no jury. That's the number one reason. That's the number one thing they wanted after the Revolutionary War. They said, we just want our trial by jury. And we want due process. Okay, well, under ecclesiastical law, you don't get that. So they said, this is how you know you're in admiralty court. No jury.